My name is Emma, and I should have turned back when the fog started rolling in. But I was so close to the top of Whisper Mountain that I kept climbing. The trail was easy to follow, and I had my phone for emergencies. What did go wrong? The fog came fast, like a gray blanket being pulled over the whole mountain. 1 minute, I could see the trees and rocks around me. The next minute, I could barely see my own feet. The world turned quiet and strange. I stopped walking and pulled out my phone. No signal, not even one bar. The screen showed I was still on the trail, but everything looked the same now. Gray fog everywhere. That's when I heard the footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my echo bouncing off the rocks. But when I stopped, the steps kept going for a few seconds more. Someone else was on the trail with me. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded muffled in the thick fog. "Is someone there?" No answer, just silence. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps started up too, matching my pace. When I walked fast, they walked fast. When I slowed down, they slowed down. But they were always a few steps behind me. I stopped suddenly and spun around. "Who's there?" I shouted. Nothing, just gray fog swirling around me like smoke. But I could feel eyes watching me. The hair on my arm stood up, and my heart started beating faster. I turned back toward the trail and kept walking. Maybe it was just another hiker who didn't want to talk. People could be weird sometimes. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The footsteps sounded different from mine. They were heavier, like whatever was following me weighed more than a person should. The fog got thicker. I had to hold my hands out in front of me to feel for trees and rocks. The trail seemed to disappear under my feet. Was I still going the right way? Step, step, step. The sounds behind me never stopped. I tried to move quietly, stepping carefully on the soft dirt. But the thing following me wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. Its footsteps got louder, like it was getting closer. My breathing got fast and shallow. I wanted to run, but I couldn't see where I was going. What if I ran off a cliff? What if I got more lost? Then I heard breathing that wasn't mine. It was deep and slow, like a big animal. But it had a strange sound to it, like air being sucked through a wet cloth. The breathing was right behind me now, maybe 10 feet away. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran. Branches grabbed at my jacket and scratched my face. Rocks tried to trip me, but I kept running through the fog, not caring where I went. I just had to get away from whatever was behind me. The footsteps behind me got faster too, but they still sounded heavy and wrong, like something big crashing through the forest. Tree branches snapped. Rocks scattered. I ran until my chest hurt and I couldn't breathe. Finally, I had to stop. I put my hands on my knees and tried to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Everything was quiet. No footsteps, no breathing, just the fog moving silently around me. Maybe I had lost it. Maybe I was safe now. Then I heard my own voice calling out from somewhere in the fog. "Hello," it said. "Is someone there?" But I wasn't talking. My mouth was closed. Someone else was using my voice, saying the exact words I had said before. "Who's there?" My voice called again from the gray mist. Cold fear ran down my back like ice water. Whatever was following me could copy my voice perfectly. It was trying to trick other people on the mountain. I covered my mouth with both hands and didn't make a sound. "Hello," my voice called again, but from a different direction now. "Is someone there?" It was moving around me in the fog, calling with my voice. Try to lure other hikers toward it. I stayed perfectly still and listened. The fake voice moved further away, calling and calling. When I couldn't hear it anymore, I started walking very quietly in the opposite direction. I walked for what felt like hours. My legs hurt, and I was getting cold. The fog was so thick I couldn't tell if it was getting dark or not. Finally, I saw a light ahead of me, a yellow glow in the gray mist. As I got closer, I could see it was a cabin with warm light in the windows. Smoke came from the chimney. I ran to the door and knocked hard. "Help me," I called. "Please let me in." An old man opened the door. He had kind eyes and a white beard. "What's wrong, child?" he asked. "Something was following me in the fog," I said. "It could copy my voice." The man's face went pale. He pulled me inside quickly and locked the door behind me. "You met the fog walker," he said quietly. "It's been on this mountain for longer than anyone can remember. It follows people in the mist and learns their voices. Then it uses those voices to call others into the fog." "What does it want?" I asked. The old man shook his head. "Nobody knows. People who follow the voices into the fog are never seen again." He let me stay in his cabin until morning. When the sun came up, the fog was gone. I could see the trail clearly now, leading down the mountain to safety. But before I left, the old man gave me a warning. "Don't ever come back to Whisper Mountain when the fog rolls in," he said. "And if you hear voices calling in the mist, don't answer. Don't even listen. The fog walker remembers every voice it hears." I hiked down the mountain as fast as I could. When I got to my car, I drove away and never looked back. But sometimes on foggy nights, I hear my own voice calling from outside my house. And I know the fog walker followed me home. I never answer. I just close my eyes and wait for morning to come. My name is Jake, and I thought camping alone in Dead Man's Hollow would help me feel better. My grandfather had died 3 months ago, and I missed him every day. He used to take me camping in these same mountains when I was little. I wanted to feel close to him again. I set up my tent near a small creek at the bottom of the hollow. The trees were tall and thick around me, blocking out most of the sky. It was quiet except for the water running over the rocks and birds singing in the branches above. I made a fire as the sun went down and cooked some hot dog for dinner. Everything felt peaceful. I thought about all the stories my grandfather used to tell me around campfires, just like this one. Stories about the old days in these mountains and the strange things that happened in the deep woods. Sometimes the mountains call to people, he used to say, but you gotta be careful what voices you listen to. I went to sleep feeling happy for the first time in months. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone calling my name. "Jake," the voice said. It came from somewhere in the dark forest around my tent. "Jake, come here, boy." My heart started pounding. The voice sounded exactly like my grandfather's. The same rough, kind voice I had heard 1,000 times before. But that was impossible. Grandfather was buried in the cemetery back in town. I had watched them put him in the ground. "Jake," the voice called again, a little further away now. "Come find me, boy. I got something to show you." I unzipped my tent and looked out. The fire had burned down to just glowing coals. The forest was dark and full of shadows. I couldn't see anything moving. "Grandfather?" I whispered. "That's right, Jake," the voice said. It was definitely his voice. Nobody else called me boy the way he did. "Come on out here. Don't be scared." But I was scared. This didn't feel right. My grandfather would never call me out into the dark woods in the middle of the night. He was always careful about safety when we went camping. "Jake," the voice said again. It was moving deeper into the hollow, away from my camp. "I've been waiting for you. Come follow my voice." I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. The night air was cold, and I shivered in my pajamas. My bare feet felt the rough ground and wet grass. "Where are you, grandfather?" I called softly. "This way, boy," his voice answered. "Keep coming." I turned on my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, but didn't show anything except trees and bushes. The voice seemed to be coming from deeper in the hollow, where the trees grew thicker. I started walking toward the voice, following the creek upstream. My flashlight beam bounced around as I walked, making strange shadows dance between the trees. "That's good, Jake," my grandfather's voice said. "Keep following." Almost there, but something was wrong with his voice now. It sounded hollow, like it was coming from inside a deep cave. and there was an echo to it that hadn't been there before. I stopped walking. "Grandfather, I can't see you." "Where are you?" "Right here, boy," the voice said, but now it was coming from a different direction, off to my left. "Come this way now." I spun around and pointed my flashlight toward the new sound. Nothing there but more trees. "Grandfather?" I called. "Over here, Jake," his voice said from behind me now. I turned around again. The voice was moving around me in the darkness, calling from different places, but I never saw anything in my flashlight beam. That's when I realized this wasn't my grandfather at all. This was something else, something that could copy his voice perfectly. Something that was trying to lead me deeper into the hollow, away from my camp and away from safety. "I'm going back to my tent," I said out loud. "No, Jake," the voice said, sounding sadder now. "Don't leave me out here alone. I've been waiting so long to see you." The voice tugged at my heart. It sounded so much like my grandfather when he was lonely or sad. But I forced myself to turn around and start walking back toward my camp. "Jake," the voice called behind me, louder now and angry. "You come back here, boy. You come back right now." I had never heard my grandfather sound angry like that. Mean and demanding. The real grandfather would never yell at me that way. I walked faster, following the creek back downstream. My flashlight showed me the way, and I could see the glow from my campfire coals ahead. "Jake," the voice screamed from the darkness. "Don't you walk away from me." But now there were more voices. All of them sounded like my grandfather, but they were coming from everywhere at once. From the trees above me, from both sides of the creek, from the thick bushes all around. "Jake! Jake! Jake!" They all called at the same time, creating a horrible chorus that echoed through the hollow. I ran the last 100 yards to my tent and dove inside. I zipped it up tight and sat in the corner, shaking. The voices kept calling outside, circling around my camp like a pack of wolves. "Come out, Jake," they said together. "Come out and play with us." I covered my ears and closed my eyes, but I could still hear them. They called all night long, sometimes sounding like my grandfather, sometimes sounding like other people I didn't know. Old voices and young voices, men and women, all begging me to come outside. When the sun finally came up, the voices stopped. I packed my tent as fast as I could and hiked out of the hollow. I didn't look back once. Later, I asked some old folks in town about Dead Man's Hollow. They told me it got its name for a reason. People have been disappearing in that hollow for over 100 years. Always campers who went in alone. The hollow collects voices, one old woman told me. Every person who ever died in there, their voice gets trapped. And on dark nights, those voices call out to the living, trying to bring them deeper into the woods where they'll never find their way out. "But the voice sounded exactly like my grandfather," I said. The woman nodded sadly. "The hollow learns the voices of people you love. It uses them against you. Your grandfather never set foot in that place, but somehow it knew his voice anyway." I never went camping alone again after that night, and I never went back to Dead Man's Hollow. But sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I hear my grandfather's voice calling my name from dark places. I know it's not really him. I know it's something hungry and evil that wants to lead me somewhere I should never go. So I don't listen. I keep walking toward the light, just like my real grandfather would have wanted me to do. My name is Lily, and I found the door 3 days after we moved into the old house on Pine Ridge. Mom and Dad bought it cheap because nobody else wanted it. The house had been empty for 20 years, and it showed. Paint peeled off the walls, floorboards creaked, and something always smelled funny in the basement. I was exploring behind the house when I saw it. A wooden door built right into the hillside, almost hidden by weeds and vines. It looked really old, with rusty metal hinges and a heavy iron latch. "Mom," I called, "there's a door back here." Mom came out and pushed the weeds away to get a better look. "Oh," That's probably an old root cellar, she said. People used to store vegetables and canned food in underground rooms like this. They stay cool all year round. Can we open it? I asked. Mom tried the latch, but it was stuck with rust and age. We'll need some tools, she said. Maybe your father can get it open this weekend. But I was too curious to wait. That night, after Mom and Dad went to bed, I snuck out with a flashlight and a hammer from Dad's toolbox. I wanted to see what was inside that mysterious door. The latch was harder to break than I thought. I had to hit it several times with the hammer before it finally snapped open with a loud crack. The sound echoed across the dark yard, and I froze, listening to see if I had woken up my parents. But the house stayed quiet. I pulled the heavy door open. It groaned on its old hinges, and stale air rushed out. The smell was terrible, like rotten vegetables and something else I couldn't name. Something dead. I pointed my flashlight into the darkness and saw stone steps leading down into the ground. The walls were made of old rocks fitted together without cement. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. I should have closed the door and gone back to bed, but I was 12 years old and curious about everything. I had to know what was down there. The stone steps were slippery with moisture. I held onto the rough wall as I walked down, counting 15 steps before I reached the bottom. My flashlight showed me a small underground room with shelves carved into the stone walls. But the shelves weren't empty like I expected. Glass jars lined every shelf, dozens of them. They were filled with murky liquid, and things floated inside them. At first, I thought they were pickled vegetables like Mom had said. But when I got closer and looked carefully, I saw they weren't vegetables at all. They were body parts. Fingers floated in one jar. An eyeball stared at me from another. A jar full of teeth sat next to one with what looked like a human ear. Some jars held things I couldn't identify, dark, twisted shapes that might have been organs. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. The flashlight shook in my hand, making the shadows dance on the walls. This wasn't a root cellar for storing food. This was something much worse. That's when I noticed the jars weren't old and dusty like everything else in the room. They looked clean and new, fresh, like someone had been down here recently. I heard a soft plop behind me and spun around. One of the jars had fallen off its shelf and broken on the stone floor. The liquid spread out in a dark puddle, and the thing that had been floating inside lay in the middle of it. It was a human hand, and it was moving. The fingers twitched and curled like it was trying to grab something. The hand flopped around on the wet stone, leaving a trail of dark liquid behind it. I screamed and ran for the stairs. But as I climbed, I heard more jars falling and breaking behind me. Plop, crash, plop, crash. Whatever was in those jars was coming out. I burst through the door and into the night air, gasping and shaking. Behind me, I could hear wet slapping sounds on the stone steps. Things crawling up from the underground room. I slammed the door shut and tried to put the broken latch back in place, but my hand was shaking too much. The door wouldn't stay closed properly. I ran back to the house and locked myself in my bedroom. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound outside made me think those horrible things were crawling around in our yard. The next morning, I told Mom and Dad what I had found. They didn't believe me at first. Dad said I had probably seen old canning jars with moldy food inside, and my imagination had made them seem scary. But when we went to look at the root cellar together, the door was wide open, and the stone steps were covered with dark, wet stains that led from the underground room all the way up to the door. Dad went down with a big flashlight to investigate. He came back up 5 minutes later, white as a sheet. "We're calling the police," he said quietly. The police came and searched the root cellar with special lights and cameras. They found broken glass everywhere and stains on the floor that they said were human blood. But all the jars were empty now. Whatever had been inside them was gone. The police asked us lots of questions, but we didn't have any answers. The house had been empty for 20 years. Nobody knew who had been using the root cellar or where those things had come from. "You need to move," the old police captain told my parents. "This house has a bad history. 3 families have lived here since 1960, and they all left suddenly. Nobody ever said why. But Dad had already spent all our money buying the house. We couldn't afford to move again. That first week, we tried to pretend everything was normal. Dad sealed up the root cellar door with cement and steel bars. We put new locks on all the house doors and windows. Mom bought motion sensor lights for the yard, but it didn't help. Strange things started happening at night. We would hear scratching sounds under the house, like something digging through the dirt. Things in our kitchen would move around by themselves. Food would disappear from the refrigerator, and sometimes late at night, I would see shapes moving outside my bedroom window. Dark things that crawled instead of walked, leaving wet trails behind them on the glass. The worst part was the smell. That same dead, rotten smell from the root cellar started filling our house. It got stronger every day, no matter how much we cleaned or used air fresheners. After 2 weeks, Mom couldn't take it anymore. She packed our bags and said we were going to stay with Grandma until Dad could figure out how to sell the house. "But we'll lose all our money," Dad said. "I don't care," Mom replied. "Something evil lives here, and I won't let it hurt our family." We left that same day and never went back. Dad tried to sell the house, but every real estate agent who went inside came out looking scared and refused to help us. The house is still empty now, 3 years later. Sometimes kids from town dare each other to go look in the windows, but they never stay long. They say you can still smell something rotten inside, and sometimes you can see wet handprints on the glass from the inside. I know what made those handprints. The things from the jars are still in that house, hiding in the dark spaces under the floors and behind the walls, waiting for the next family to move in and discover their secret. I just hope those people are smarter than we were, and they don't open any doors they find buried in the ground. My name is Tommy, and I should have listened when old Pete warned me about the cabin on Lookout Ridge. But I was 15 and thought I knew everything. When my parents said I could spend a week alone in our family cabin, I was excited. No rules, no bedtime, no chores. Just me in the mountains. The cabin sat on a small clearing halfway up the ridge. Tall pine trees surrounded it on 3 sides, and the 4th side looked out over the valley below. Dad had built it himself when I was little, and we came here every summer to fish and hike. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon and spent the first day settling in. I brought enough food for a week, plus my fishing gear and some books to read. The cabin had no electricity, just oil lamps and a wood stove. It was peaceful and quiet, exactly what I wanted. That first night, I made a fire in the stove and read. Around 10 o'clock, I blew out the lamp. The cabin was dark except for the orange bulbs. I was almost asleep when I saw the first pair of eyes. They glowed yellow-green in the darkness outside of the bedroom window, about 6 feet away. At first, I thought it was a deer. Animals came around the cabin all the time, looking for food sources. But these eyes didn't move like an animal's eyes. They just stared at me through the glass. Even when I sat up in bed and stared at them, they didn't blink or look away. I got up and walked to the window. The eyes watched me the whole time. When I pressed my face against the glass to get a better look, I couldn't see anything else. No body, no shape. Just 2 glowing eyes floating in the darkness between the trees. I tapped on the window. "Go away," I said. The eyes blinked once, slowly. Then they moved backward into the forest and disappeared. I went back to bed, but it took me a long time to fall asleep. Every few minutes, I would look toward the window to see if the eyes had come back. But I didn't see them again that night. The next morning, I walked around the outside of the cabin to look for tracks or signs of what had been watching me. I found strange footprints in the soft dirt under my bedroom window. They looked almost human, but too big and with only 4 toes instead of 5. That day, I hiked down to the old store at the bottom of the mountain to buy more supplies. Old Pete ran the store and had lived in these mountains his whole life. He knew everything about the local wildlife. I saw some weird eyes outside my cabin last night. I told him, yellow-green and glowing. What kind of animal has eyes like that? Pete's face went serious. Where's your cabin at, boy? Up on Lookout Ridge, the small clearing with the pine trees. Pete shook his head slowly. You shouldn't be staying up there alone, especially not at night. Why? What's wrong with Lookout Ridge? Them eyes you saw, Pete said quietly. They belong to something that ain't quite animal and ain't quite human. We call them the Watchers. They've been living in these mountains since before my grandfather's time. What do they want? I asked. Nobody knows for sure, but they watch people, especially folks who stay alone in the woods. Most times they just look and don't do nothing else. But sometimes, Pete trailed off. Sometimes what? Sometimes people disappear. Cabins get found empty, with no sign of what happened to the folks inside. Just those four-toed tracks all around the building. I felt a chill run down my back, remembering the tracks I'd found that morning. Maybe you should come stay down here in town for the rest of your visit, Pete suggested. But I was stubborn and proud. I didn't want to admit I was scared. I'll be fine, I said. It was probably just a curious animal. Pete shrugged. Suit yourself, boy, but keep your doors locked at night. And if you see more than one pair of eyes, you better run. I went back to the cabin that afternoon with Pete's warning echoing in my head. As the sun went down, I made sure all the windows were latched tight and pushed a chair in front of the door. Around 9 o'clock, the eyes came back. This time there were 3 pairs, all glowing yellow-green in the darkness. They appeared at different windows around the cabin. One at my bedroom window, one at the kitchen window, and one at the window by the front door. I moved carefully from room to room, looking out at each pair of eyes in turn. They all stared at me with the same unwavering gaze. When I moved, they followed me with their eyes, turning to track my movement through the cabin. I tried turning on all the oil lamps to make the inside of the cabin bright, hoping that would make them go away. But the bright light inside just made it harder for me to see outside. The eyes became even more mysterious, floating in the complete darkness beyond the windows. Around midnight, I heard scratching sounds on the roof. Slow, deliberate scratches like claws dragging across the wooden shingles. The sounds moved from one end of the cabin to the other, then back again. The scratching continued for an hour. Sometimes it was directly above my bed, sometimes above the kitchen. Whatever was making the sounds was big enough to walk around on the roof without falling through. Then I heard the doorknob turning. I had locked the front door and pushed the chair against it, but now I could hear the metal knob slowly rotating back and forth. Something was testing the lock, trying to get inside. I grabbed the poker from beside the wood stove and crept toward the door. The chair was still in place, but the doorknob kept turning. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door, deep, slow breaths that sounded almost human. "Go away," I shouted. "Leave me alone." The breathing stopped. The doorknob stopped turning. Everything went quiet. I waited by the door for 10 minutes, holding the poker and listening. Nothing happened. Maybe I'd scared it away. Then I heard tapping on the bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. I crept back to the bedroom and looked out. 6 pairs of eyes now surrounded the cabin, all staring at me through different windows. As I watched, more eyes appeared between the trees. 8 pairs, 10 pairs, 12. They were gathering. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the middle of the cabin with the poker in my hands, watching the windows. The eyes never went away. They just watched and waited, glowing in the darkness like evil stars. When the sun finally came up, the eyes disappeared one by one. I waited until full daylight before I dared to open the door and look outside. 4-toed tracks covered the ground around the cabin. Hundreds of them, going in circles around the building. They led up to every window and door, then back into the forest. I packed my things and left that morning. I didn't even stop to put out the fire in the stove. I just wanted to get away from Lookout Ridge as fast as possible. Old Pete was sweeping his front porch when I drove past his store. He looked at my pale face and packed car and nodded knowingly. "Told you so, boy," he called out. "How many eyes did you see?" "Too many," I called back. I never went back to the cabin on Lookout Ridge. Dad was disappointed when I told him I didn't want to go there anymore, but I couldn't explain about the eyes without sounding crazy. The cabin is still there, as far as I know, but I wouldn't go near it again, not even in broad daylight, because I know the watchers are still out there in the forest, waiting with their glowing eyes for the next person foolish enough to stay alone in their territory. And late at night, when I'm lying in my bed at home, sometimes I see yellow-green lights moving outside my bedroom window. The watchers follow me down from the mountain, and now they know where I live. I keep my curtains closed and try not to look outside after dark, because I know if I see those eyes again, this time they won't just watch. This time they'll come inside. My name is Ruby, and I wish Beth and I had never found that old mine entrance on Copper Mountain. We were 14 and always looking for adventure during our summer break. When we heard kids at school talking about abandoned coal mines in the mountains, we decided we had to explore one. "My dad says there are dozens of old mines up there," Beth told me as we hiked up the mountain trail. "Most of them are sealed up, but some still have open entrances." We brought flashlights, bottles of water, and a rope that Beth had taken from her garage. We figured if we found a mine, we might need the rope to climb down into it safely. The trail wound through thick forest for about 2 miles before we found what we were looking for. Hidden behind a wall of overgrown bushes, we discovered a dark opening in the side of the mountain. Old wooden beams framed the entrance, and rusty metal tracks disappeared into the darkness. "This is it," Beth said excitedly. "A real coal mine." I wasn't as excited as she was. The entrance looked scary, like a mouth opening into the mountain. Cold air flowed out of it, carrying a musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. "Are you sure this is safe?" I asked. "Come on, Ruby," Beth said. "Don't be a baby. We'll just go in a little way and look around." She turned on her flashlight and stepped through the entrance. I didn't want to be called a baby, so I followed her into the dark tunnel. The mine shaft was bigger than I expected. The ceiling was about 8 feet high, supported by old wooden beams that creaked when the wind blew through them. The walls were rough stone and dirt, and water dripped from somewhere up ahead. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, showing us metal tracks that led deeper into the mountain. Old pieces of mining equipment sat along the walls. Rusty buckets, broken shovels, and coils of rotted rope. "This is so cool," Beth whispered. "It's like being inside a history book." We walked carefully along the tracks, our footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. After about 50 yards, the main tunnel split into 2 smaller passages. Beth wanted to take the left passage, but I noticed something that made me stop. "Look at the ground," I said, pointing my flashlight down at the dirt floor. Fresh footprints led down the right passage. They looked like they had been made recently, maybe that morning or the day before. The prints were bare feet, with long toes that left deep marks in the soft earth. "Someone else has been down here," I said. Beth shined her light on the footprints. Probably just other kids exploring like us. But something about the footprints bothered me. They were too big to belong to kids, and the toes were longer than normal human toes. They almost looked like animal tracks, except they had 5 toes instead of 4. "Let's follow them," Beth said. "Maybe we'll find whoever made them." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. But Beth was already walking down the right passage, following the strange footprints deeper into the mine. I had to follow her or be left alone in the dark. We walked for another 100 yards, our flashlights showing us more of the same: rough stone walls, dripping water, and those weird footprints leading us forward. Then we heard the sound. It came from somewhere ahead of us in the darkness, a low, rhythmic tapping, like someone hitting stone with a metal tool. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the tunnel, making it hard to tell exactly where it was coming from. Hello, Beth called out. Is someone there? The tapping stopped immediately. Everything went quiet except for the sound of dripping water and our own breathing. Maybe we should go back, I whispered, but Beth kept walking toward where the sound had come from. Don't be such a scaredy cat, Ruby. It's probably just water dripping on metal or something. We rounded a bend in the tunnel and found ourselves in a larger chamber. Our flashlights showed us a room about the size of a classroom, with several smaller tunnels leading off in different directions. Old mining equipment was scattered around, pickaxes, shovels, and wooden crates. But what caught my attention was what sat in the middle of the chamber. It was a pile of bones. Not animal bones, human bones. Skulls and rib cages and long leg bones, all stacked up in a neat pile about 3 feet high. Some of the bones still had bits of cloth and leather clinging to them, like they had come from old clothes and boots. Beth screamed and dropped her flashlight. It hit the ground and went out, leaving us with just my light to see by. We have to get out of here, I said, grabbing Beth's arm. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight beam swept across one of the side tunnels. Something moved in the shadows, something big and pale that quickly ducked out of sight. Did you see that? I whispered. See what? Beth was picking up her flashlight and trying to get it to work again. I kept my light pointed at the tunnel where I had seen the movement. For a moment, nothing happened. Then 2 eyes reflected back at me from the darkness. Not animal eyes, but human eyes. Someone was hiding in that tunnel, watching us. There's someone in there, I said quietly. Beth got her flashlight working again and pointed it at the same tunnel. The eyes disappeared immediately, but we could hear shuffling sounds and heavy breathing. Who's there? Beth called out. We're just exploring. We don't want any trouble. A voice answered from the darkness, but it wasn't speaking English. It was a series of clicks and grunts and strange whistling sounds, like no language I had ever heard before. What was that? Beth whispered. Before I could answer, we heard the same strange language coming from another tunnel. Then another. Whatever was down here with us, there was more than one of them. The clicking and whistling sounds got closer. I could see pale shapes moving in the darkness at the edges of our flashlight beams. They walked upright like people, but they moved wrong, too quick and jerky, like they weren't used to walking on 2 legs. Run, I said. We turned and ran back toward the main tunnel as fast as we could. Behind us, the clicking sounds got louder and more excited. I could hear bare feet slapping against stone as things chased us through the darkness. Beth was faster than me and pulled ahead. I tried to keep up, but the tunnel was uneven and I kept stumbling on loose rocks. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran, showing me glimpses of the rough walls rushing past. I could hear the things getting closer behind me. Their breathing was loud and raspy, and they made those strange clicking sounds as they ran. I didn't dare look back to see how close they were. Finally, I saw light ahead, real sunlight coming through the mine entrance. Beth had already made it outside and was waiting for me. Come on, Ruby, she shouted. I burst out of the mine entrance and into the bright afternoon sunshine. We didn't stop running until we reached the main trail, half a mile away from the mine. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, I looked back toward the mountain. Dark shapes moved in the shadows near the mine entrance, but they didn't follow us into the open sunlight. What were those things? Beth asked between gasps. I don't know, I said, but they weren't human. We hiked back to town as fast as we could and told Beth's dad what we had found. He called the police, and they went up to investigate the mine the next day. The police found the pile of bones just like we had described. But they didn't find any sign of the pale things that had chased us. The side tunnels were empty, and there were no fresh footprints in the dirt. Probably just echoes and shadows that scared the girls. One police officer told Beth's dad, "Old minds can play tricks on your mind. But know what I saw? Those things were real, and they had been living in that mine for a long time." The pile of bones proved that other people had found them before us. People who weren't lucky enough to escape. The police sealed up the mine entrance with concrete and steel bars. There's a sign there now that says, "Danger, keep out." Most people think it's just to keep kids from getting hurt in the unstable tunnels. But I know the real reason they sealed it up. They wanted to make sure those pale things could never get out. The problem is there are dozens of old mines on Copper Mountain, and I don't think they found all the entrances. Sometimes when I'm hiking in the mountains, I hear that strange clicking and whistling language echoing from dark places between the rocks. And I know the pale things are still down there, waiting in the darkness for the next curious person to wander into their territory. I never go near old mines anymore, and I tell every kid I meet the same thing. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and some doors should stay closed forever. My name is Ben, and I learned too late that some hunting parties in the mountains aren't looking for deer or bears. They're hunting something much more dangerous, and sometimes they're not even human. It started on a Friday night in October when I got lost hiking back from Crow's Peak. I had been taking pictures of the fall leaves for a school project and lost track of time. By the time I started back down the mountain, the sun was already setting. I thought I knew the trail well enough to hike it in the dark, but everything looks different at night. Trees that seemed familiar in daylight became strange and threatening shadows. Rocks looked like crouching animals. Every sound made me jump. After an hour of stumbling through the forest, I had to admit I was completely lost. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The screen showed I was miles from any road or trail. That's when I heard the hunting horns. The sound came from somewhere behind me on the mountain, long, deep notes that echoed through the forest. At first, I felt relieved. Hunters would know these mountains better than me. They could help me find my way home. I started walking toward the sound of the horns. As I got closer, I could hear other sounds too, dogs barking and men shouting to each other through the trees. It sounded like a big hunting party, but something felt wrong about it. The horns had a strange, wild sound that didn't match any hunting horn I'd ever heard. And the dogs sounded more like wolves than hunting hounds. Their howls were too long and mournful. I climbed up a rocky hill to get a better view of where the sounds were coming from. When I reached the top, I could see lights moving through the forest below me, torches or lanterns carried by the hunting party. But these hunters were moving too fast. No human could run through thick forest that quickly, especially in the dark. The lights moved in a straight line through the trees, never slowing down for obstacles or rough ground. The horns sounded again, much closer now, and this time I heard something that made my blood turn cold. The dogs had caught a scent. Their barking got more excited and urgent. They were chasing something. They were chasing me. I ran down the other side of the hill as fast as I could. Branches grabbed at my clothes and scratched my face, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, the barking got louder and closer. Whatever those things were, they could track me through the dark forest like I was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. I stumbled through a creek and up another hill, hoping the water would throw them off my scent. But the horns kept sounding behind me, and the lights kept following. They were getting closer. My lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber, but I kept running. I had no choice. I could hear individual voices now, calling to each other in a language I didn't understand. They sounded excited, like they were enjoying the hunt. I found myself on a narrow ridge with steep drops on both sides. There was nowhere to go but forward along the rocky spine of the mountain. Behind me, I could see the lights spreading out as the hunters climbed up both sides of the ridge. They were trying to surround me. The horns sounded again, so close it seemed to be right behind me. I looked back and saw something that made me stumble and almost fall off the ridge. The lights weren't lanterns or torches. They were glowing eyes, dozens of them, moving through the forest in perfect formation. And the shapes carrying them weren't quite human. They were too tall and moved wrong, like they had too many joints in their arms and legs. The dogs running with them weren't dogs either. They were huge, wolf-like creatures with glowing red eyes and teeth that reflected the moonlight like knives. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. The ridge was narrow and covered with loose rocks that tried to trip me with every step, but somehow I managed to stay on my feet and keep moving. Up ahead, I could see the ridge connected to another mountain. If I could make it that far, maybe I could lose them in the thick forest on the other side. But the hunters were faster than me. I could hear them gaining ground, their strange voices getting louder and more excited. The wolf things were howling with hunger, so close I could hear their paws scratching on the rocks behind me. Just when I thought they would catch me, I saw a light ahead that wasn't one of theirs. It was warm and yellow, coming from a small cabin built right on a mountainside. Smoke rose from its chimney, and I could see a person moving around inside. I ran toward the cabin and pounded on the door. "Help me," I shouted. "Please let me in." The door opened immediately, and an old mountain man pulled me inside. He was tall and thin with a long gray beard and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Get away from the windows," he said quietly. "Don't let them see you." He blew out all the oil lamps in the cabin, leaving us in complete darkness. Outside, I could hear the hunting party arriving. The wolf things sniffed around the cabin, whimpering and growling. Strange voices called to each other in that unknown language. "What are they?" I whispered. "The wild hunt," the old man whispered back. "They've been riding these mountains since before the first settlers came. Most nights they hunt deer and bears. But on moonless nights like tonight, they hunt people." "What?" "Some say they're ghosts of old hunters who got lost in these mountains and never found their way out. Others say there's something else entirely, things that were never human to begin with." The sounds outside got louder. Something scratched at the cabin door with long claws. A voice spoke right outside the window, so close I could have reached out and touched it. "We know you're in there, boy," it said in perfect English. "Come out and make this easy on yourself. The hunt is no fun if the prey hides." The old man put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed tight, warning me to stay quiet. "We can wait," the voice continued. "We have all night, and we know this mountain better than any human ever will." For the next hour, they circled the cabin like sharks. I could hear them testing the doors and windows, looking for a way in. But the old man had built his cabin well. Every opening was protected by iron bars or heavy wooden shutters. Finally, as the night grew later, the sound started to fade away. The hunting horns called from farther and farther distances, and the wolf howls grew faint. The wild hunt was moving on to other prey. "They're gone," the old man said after another hour of silence. "But you can't leave until sunrise. They might come back." I spent the rest of the night in his cabin, listening to him tell stories about the wild hunt. He had lived on this mountain for 40 years and seen them many times. Sometimes they chased hikers or campers. Sometimes they just rode through the forest for the joy of hunting. "The trick is to never run," he told me. "Running triggers their hunting instincts. If you ever hear those horns again, find shelter and stay perfectly still until dawn." When the sun came up, the old man showed me a trail that led safely down the mountain. I made it home without seeing any sign of the hunters or their wolf creatures. I never told anyone about that night. Who would believe me? But I never went hiking alone in the mountains again, especially not after dark. Sometimes on moonless nights when the wind is blowing through the trees, I can hear hunting horns in the distance. And I know the wild hunt is riding again, looking for anyone foolish enough to be caught alone in their territory. I stay inside on those nights, with all my doors locked and curtains drawn, because I know if I see those glowing eyes again, this time they won't give up the chase. This time they'll hunt me until dawn, or until they catch me. My name is Annie, and I wish I had never touched the weeping willow on Sorrow Hill. Everyone in town knew to stay away from that tree, but I was new to the mountains and didn't know the stories. If I had, maybe my little brother would still be here. My family moved to Cedar Hollow in August, right before I started 8th grade. Dad got a job at the lumber mill, and Mom said the mountain air would be good for all of us. We rented a small house at the edge of town, with Sorrow Hill rising up behind our backyard. The hill got its name from the huge willow tree that grew at the top. Even from our house, we could see its long, drooping branches swaying in the wind. Local kids called it the crying tree because water always dripped from its branches, even when it hadn't rained for weeks. That tree gives me the creeps, my little brother Danny said on our first day in the new house. He was only 8 and usually wasn't scared of anything. It looked sad. I thought the tree was beautiful. Its branches hung down like a green curtain, and the way the sunlight filtered through them made magical patterns on the ground. I want to climb the hill and sit under it to read my books. Can we go explore the hill? I asked Mom. I'd rather you didn't, she said. The neighbors mentioned that people don't usually go up there. Something about the tree being unsafe. But I was 13 and thought grown-ups worried about everything. The next afternoon, while Mom was at the grocery store and Dad was at work, I decided to hike up Sorrow Hill by myself. The climb was steeper than it looked from our house. By the time I reached the top, I was breathing hard and sweating. But when I saw the crying tree up close, I forgot all about being tired. It was the most beautiful tree I had ever seen. The trunk was massive, at least 10 feet around, with smooth gray bark. The branches hung down like a natural tent, creating a cool, shaded space underneath. And yes, water dripped constantly from the leaves, even though the sky was clear. I ducked under the hanging branches and sat down with my back against the trunk. It was peaceful and quiet, like being in a secret room. The dripping water made a gentle pattering sound on the leaves around me. That's when I noticed the carvings. Names were carved all over the trunk, dozens of them, scratched deep into the bark. Some looked old and weathered, while others seemed fresh. I read them as I walked around the tree. Mary, 1987. James, 1995. Little Susan, 1972, Michael, 2003. All the names had years next to them, going back to the 1800s. It was like a record of everyone who had visited the tree over the past century and a half. I found a spot where the bark was smooth and used my house key to carve my own name, Annie 2023. It felt good to add myself to the long list of visitors. But as soon as I finished carving the last letter, something strange happened. The water dripping from the tree got heavier, like it had started raining inside the circle of branches, and the drops felt warm against my skin. I looked up at the leaves above me and gasped. The water wasn't clear anymore, it was red. Dark red drops fell like tears from every branch, staining the ground around me. I scrambled out from under the tree and looked back at it. From outside the circle of branches, everything looked normal. Clear water dripped from green leaves, just like before. But I could still see red stains on my clothes and hands. I ran down the hill as fast as I could, my heart pounding. When I got home, I washed my hands and changed my clothes. The red stains came out easily, like they had never been there at all. That night at dinner, I told my family about the tree and all the carved names. "You carve your name in it?" Dad asked, frowning. "Just with my house key. I didn't hurt the tree or anything." Mom and Dad looked at each other with worried expressions. "Annie," Mom said carefully, "I think you should stay away from that tree from now on." "Why? What's wrong with it?" "We'll talk about it later," Dad said. "Right now, let's just say the tree has a bad reputation in this town." But I was curious, and the tree had been so beautiful. The next day, I went back. This time, Danny followed me up the hill. I had told him not to come, but he was stubborn and wanted to see the famous crying tree for himself. "Wow," he said when we reached the top. "It really does look like it's crying." I ducked under the branches again, and Danny followed me. The space under the tree felt different this time, colder and somehow sadder. The water dripping from the leaves seemed louder too. "Look at all these names," Danny said, running his fingers over the carved letters. "There are so many of them." That's when I noticed something I had missed the day before. Next to each name and year, there was a small symbol carved into the bark. Some looked like crosses, others like flowers. A few were just simple X marks. "What do you think these symbols mean?" I asked Danny. "Maybe they show how each person died," he said. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, how they died?" "These look like tombstones, don't they? Names, dates, and little pictures. Maybe this tree is like a graveyard." I looked at the carvings again with fresh eyes. Danny was right. They did look like the inscriptions you see on old tombstones. And if that was true, then all these people. "We need to leave," I said suddenly. "Right now." But Danny was staring at something on the far side of the tree trunk. "Annie," he said quietly, "look at this." I walked over to where he was pointing. There, carved fresh into the bark, was my name, Annie 2023. But next to it was a symbol I definitely hadn't carved, a small skull. "I didn't carve that," I whispered. "And look at this," Danny said, pointing to the spot right below my name. Someone had carved Danny 2023 into the bark, with a skull symbol next to it too. The letters looked fresh, like they had been carved just moments before. "I want to go home," Danny said, backing away from the tree. But as we turned to leave, something grabbed my wrist. I looked down and saw a thin branch from the tree wrapped around my arm like a rope. The branch was warm and felt almost alive, like a snake. "Danny, help me," I called. He grabbed my other arm and pulled as hard as he could. The branch tightened around my wrist, and I could feel it pulling me back toward the tree trunk. More branches started reaching for us, moving like slow-motion tentacles. Danny pulled harder, and suddenly the branch let go. We both tumbled backward and rolled down the hill, scratching ourselves on rocks and thorns. We didn't stop running until we reached our backyard. That night, Mom and Dad sat us down and told us the truth about the crying tree. "Every person whose name is carved in that tree has disappeared," Dad said. "Some vanished the same day they carved their names. Others lasted a few days or weeks. But eventually, they all went missing. The tree marks them somehow," Mom added, "like it's claiming them. The police have investigated dozens of disappearances over the years, but they never find any trace of the missing people. What happens to them?" I asked. "Nobody knows. They just disappear, usually from their beds in the middle of the night." I felt sick to my stomach. "So everyone whose name is on that tree is gone," Dad finished. "That's why locals stay away from Sorrow Hill, and why we're moving out of this house tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Danny said, "but we just got here." "I already called my old job," Dad said. "They'll take me back. We can't stay here, not with your names carved in that tree." We packed our things that same night. But as we loaded boxes into the car, I kept looking up at Sorrow Hill. Even in the darkness, I could see the outline of the crying tree against the stars. And I could swear I saw it moving, reaching its branches down toward our house like long, grasping fingers. We drove all night to get away from Cedar Hollow. Dad didn't want to spend another night in the house, not with our names on the tree. For 3 months, everything was fine. We moved back to our old town, and Danny and I started at our old schools. I almost convinced myself that the whole thing had been my imagination. Then on a cold night in November, I woke up to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. A willow branch was pressed against the glass, its thin leaves rustling in the wind. But there were no willow trees in our yard. The nearest one was hundreds of miles away, back in Cedar Hollow. The branch tapped again, more insistently this time, and I could see drops of water, or maybe blood, running down the window glass. I woke up Danny and made him come sleep in my room. The next morning, the branch was gone, but there were scratches on the outside of my window that looked like they had been made by claws. The tree had found us, even here, and I knew it would never stop looking until it got what it wanted. Danny and I sleep in the same room now, with the curtains always closed. We never go outside after dark, and we check every window and door twice before going to bed, because we know the crying tree is still out there, reaching across the miles with its hungry branches, trying to collect the names it carved in its bark. And someday, when we least expect it, those branches will find a way inside. My name is Owen, and I should have listened when the bait shop owner warned me about Mirror Lake. But I was 15 and thought I knew everything about fishing. When he told me the lake was off limits, I figured he just wanted to keep the best fishing spot for himself. I had been fishing the streams and ponds around Millfield for 3 years, ever since my family moved to the mountains. I knew every good spot within 10 miles of town, but I had never caught anything bigger than a 2-pound bass, and I was getting frustrated. "You want to catch real fish?" my friend Tyler said one afternoon. "There's a lake up on Pine Mountain that's supposed to be full of giant trout. My cousin caught a 5-pounder there last summer." "Which lake?" I asked. "Mirror Lake. It's about an hour hike from the old logging road." I had heard of Mirror Lake, but never been there. When I asked at Murphy's bait shop about the best lures to use there, old Mr. Murphy's face went pale. "You don't want to fish that lake, son," he said quietly. "Why not? Is it private property?" Worse than that, Murphy looked around his shop like he was making sure nobody else could hear. "That lake has a bad reputation. People who fish there alone sometimes don't come back." "Come on, Mr. Murphy. You're just trying to scare me." "I'm trying to keep you safe," he said seriously. 3 fishermen have disappeared from Mirror Lake in the past 10 years. Their gear was found on the shore, but they were never seen again. I figured he was just telling tall tales to keep kids away from his secret fishing spot. Every old fisherman had stories like that. So the next Saturday morning, I packed my gear and hiked up to Mirror Lake by myself. The trail was harder than Tyler had made it sound. It wound through thick forest for over an hour before finally opening up at the lake shore. But when I saw the water, I understood why it was called Mirror Lake. The surface was perfectly still, like a giant piece of black glass. It reflected the surrounding pine trees and mountains so clearly that it was hard to tell where the real world ended and the reflection began. The lake was bigger than I expected, maybe half a mile across and perfectly round. I set up my fishing gear on a flat rock near the water's edge. The lake was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. No birds sang in the trees around it, and no insects buzzed near the water. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. I cast my line out toward the center of the lake and watched the ripples spread across the perfect surface. Within minutes, I felt a strong tug on my line. I had hooked something big. I fought the fish for 10 minutes before finally pulling it to shore. It was the biggest trout I had ever seen, at least 4 pounds in beautiful silver color. I was so excited I forgot all about Mr. Murphy's warnings. I cast my line again and caught another big fish within minutes. Then another. By noon, I had caught 6 huge trout, more fish than I usually caught in a whole month. That's when I saw the first face. I was baiting my hook for another cast when something in the water caught my eye. About 20 feet from shore, just under the surface, I could see what looked like a human face staring up at me. At first, I thought it was just my reflection. But when I moved, the face didn't move with me. It just kept staring with wide, unblinking eyes. I leaned closer to the water to get a better look. The face was pale and bloated, like it had been underwater for a long time. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, and its hair floated around its head like seaweed. I jumped back from the water's edge, my heart pounding. When I looked again, the face was gone. Maybe it had just been a trick of the light or a shadow from the clouds above. I tried to convince myself that's all it was as I cast my line again. But then I saw another face, and another. They appeared all around the lake, just under the surface. Men and women of different ages, all with that same pale, drowned look. Some wore old-fashioned clothes, like they had been in the water for decades. Others looked more recent. I counted at least a dozen faces staring up at me from the dark water. They didn't move or float around like real bodies would. They just hung there beneath the surface, watching me with dead eyes. I packed up my fishing gear as fast as I could, but I couldn't stop looking at the water. More faces kept appearing, rising up from the deeper parts of the lake. Some were so far down they were just pale blurs in the darkness. As I got ready to leave, I heard a splash behind me. I turned around and saw ripples spreading across the water near where I had been fishing. Something had surfaced, but I couldn't see what it was. Then I heard a voice calling from the middle of the lake. "Help me," it said. The voice was weak and desperate, like someone who was drowning. "Please help me." I looked toward the sound and saw a man's head bobbing in the water about 50 yards from shore. He was waving one arm above the surface, trying to get my attention. "I can't swim back," he called. "Something's got my legs." My first instinct was to help him. I started looking around for a branch or rope I could throw to him. But then I remembered all those faces under the water and Mr. Murphy's warning about fishermen who never came back. "How long have you been out there?" I called to the man. "Hours," he said. "I fell off my boat this morning. Please help me before I drown." But something about his voice bothered me. It sounded hollow and strange, like it was coming from underwater, even though his head was clearly above the surface. I looked more carefully at the man in the water. His face was pale, and his eyes looked wrong, too wide and unblinking. And although he said he was drowning, he wasn't struggling the way a real drowning person would. He just floated there, perfectly still except for that one arm waving slowly back and forth. "Come closer," he called. "I can't swim to shore." More voices joined his, women and children calling for help from different parts of the lake. They all sounded desperate and afraid, begging me to come into the water and save them. But I could see faces under the surface near each voice. The things calling for help weren't people at all. They were the same drowned faces I'd seen earlier, somehow projecting their voices above the water. "Come in, Owen," one of them called, using my name even though I had never told them what it was. "The water's nice and warm." I backed away from the lake, dragging my fishing gear behind me. The voices got louder and more insistent, calling my name and begging me not to leave them. "Don't go, Owen," they pleaded. "We've been waiting so long for someone to join us." I ran into the forest and didn't stop until I reached the logging road. Behind me, I could hear the voices echoing through the trees, growing fainter and fainter until they finally disappeared. When I got back to town, I went straight to Murphy's bait shop. The old man took one look at my pale face and shaking hands and nodded sadly. "You saw them, didn't you?" he said. "The faces in the water. What are they?" I asked. "Every person who ever drowned in that lake," Murphy said. "The water doesn't give up its dead. It keeps them down there, alive somehow, hungry for company. But I caught fish there, big ones." Murphy nodded. "That's the trap. The lake provides good fishing to lure people in. Then the drowned ones try to convince them to come into the water. Some folks can resist the calls for help. Others can't. What happens to the ones who can't resist? They become new faces under the water. and the lake gets a little hungrier for the next fisherman who comes along. I never went back to Mirror Lake, and I warned every angler I met to stay away from it. But I know some of them don't listen. Young fishermen think they're too smart to fall for old superstitions. Every few years, I hear about another missing person who was last seen heading toward Pine Mountain with fishing gear. The search parties always find their tackle box and rod left on the shore of Mirror Lake, but they never find the fisherman. And I know that somewhere beneath that still, dark water, another pale face has joined the collection, waiting patiently for the next person to cast a line into their hungry lake. The fish may be big in Mirror Lake, but they're not worth the price the water demands in return. My name is Grace, and I should have never answered the door on the third night. But by then, the knocking had driven me almost crazy, and I had to know what was out there in the darkness. It started the night I moved into my Gray Tan's cabin on Raven Mountain. Aunt Martha had died 3 months earlier and left me the little log house in her will. My parents thought I was too young to live alone at 16, but I convinced them to let me try it for the summer. I wanted to get away from the city and have some peace and quiet to write in my journal. The cabin was perfect, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the forest. It had no electricity or running water, but I didn't mind. I brought oil lamps for light and got my water from the well behind the house. For the first 2 days, everything was wonderful. I spent my time reading, writing, and exploring the mountain trails around the cabin. At night, I would sit by the fire and listen to the owls calling in the dark forest. Then came the first knock. It was exactly midnight when I heard it, 3 slow, heavy knocks on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. I was sitting by the fireplace reading a book when the sound made me jump. Who would be visiting at midnight? The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and there was no road to the cabin, just a hiking trail. Who's there? I called out. No answer, just silence. I waited for several minutes, listening carefully. Maybe it had been a tree, branch blown against the door by the wind. But the night was perfectly still. I went to the door and put my ear against it. I couldn't hear anything outside. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement at all. Hello. I called again. Is someone there? Still no answer. I was about to go back to my book when the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. The same 3 slow, heavy knocks exactly like before. This time I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. The porch was empty. Nobody was there. I could see the forest around the cabin clearly in the moonlight, but nothing was moving. I stepped outside and walked around the cabin, checking for signs that someone had been there. But I found no footprints in the dirt, no broken branches, nothing to show that anyone had approached the door. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. Maybe it had been an animal, a bear or deer bumping against the door. Mountain animals could be curious about human dwellings. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. The knocking had been too deliberate, too purposeful. Someone or something had been standing on my porch, knocking on my door. I didn't sleep well that night. Every little sound made me think the knocking had returned, but stayed quiet until morning. The next day, I hiked down to the general store in the valley to buy supplies. I mentioned the strange knocking to Mrs. Wilson, the store owner. "You're staying in Martha's old cabin?" she asked, her face growing serious. "Yes. Did you know my great-aunt? Known her for 40 years. She was a good woman, but that cabin..." Mrs. Wilson shook her head. She had troubles up there toward the end. "What kind of troubles?" Said something knocked on her door every night at midnight. Same 3 knocks over and over. She came down here several times asking if anyone was playing tricks on her. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did anyone ever figure out what it was? No. Martha thought maybe it was her dead husband trying to contact her. He passed away 5 years ago, and was buried in the little cemetery behind the cabin. I had seen the cemetery, just 3 old graves surrounded by a rusted iron fence. One of them had Uncle William's name on it, but Martha said the knocking didn't start until just before she died. Mrs. Wilson continued. The last month of her life, she barely slept. Said whatever was knocking was getting more insistent. I bought my supplies and hiked back up to the cabin, Mrs. Wilson's words echoing in my head. That night, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked tight before going to bed. At exactly midnight, the knocking returned. Knock, knock, knock. I lay in bed, my heart pounding. Maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. But the knocking came again, and again, every few minutes, those same 3 heavy knocks on the front door. I cover my head with my pillow and try to block out the sound, but it continued for over an hour. Knock, knock, always the same rhythm, always the same intensity. Finally, around 1 in the morning, it stopped. The cabin fell silent, and I eventually drifted off to sleep. The third night was worse. The knocking started at midnight as before, but this time it was louder and more urgent. Knock, knock, knock. The door shook with each impact like someone was pounding on it with both fists. I got out of bed and crept to the front room. Through the window, I could see the porch clearly in the moonlight. Still empty. But the knocking continued, so loud now that the whole cabin seemed to vibrate with each impact. Whatever was out, there was getting angry that I wouldn't answer. What do you want? I shouted at the door. The knocking stopped immediately. For a moment, everything was perfectly quiet. Then I heard a voice, low and raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. Let me in, it said. The voice came from right outside the door, so close that whoever was speaking must have been pressed against it. Who are you? I asked. You know who I am, the voice replied. You've been living in my house. Uncle William. It had to be, but Uncle William had been dead for 5 years. You're not real, I said, trying to convince myself as much as the voice outside. Dead people can't come back. Can't they? The voice asked, and I could hear dark amusement in it. Then explain how I'm talking to you. The knocking started again, but now it came from all around the cabin. Knock, knock, knock on the front door. Knock, knock, knock on the back door. Knock, knock, knock on every window. Whatever was out there had surrounded the cabin. Let me in, Grace, all the voices said at once. This is my home. I have a right to be here. I ran to my bedroom and hid under the covers, but the knocking followed me. It came from the bedroom window now, just inches from my head. Knock, knock, knock. I'm not going away, the voice said through the glass. I'll knock every night until you let me in. Every night for the rest of your life. The knocking continued until dawn. When the sun came up, it finally stopped, and I heard footsteps walking away from the cabin. But I was too scared to look outside and see what was leaving. I packed my things and hiked down to the valley that morning. Mrs. Wilson took one look at my exhausted, frightened face and nodded knowingly. The knocking got to you too, didn't it? She said. It said it was my Uncle William. It wanted me to let it in. That's what it told Martha too. But here's the thing, honey, William was cremated when he died. There's nothing buried in that grave behind the cabin except an empty coffin. I felt my blood turn cold. Then what was knocking on my door? Something that wanted Martha to think it was her husband. Something that's been trying to get into that cabin for years, using the voices of dead people to trick the living. What would happen if someone let it in? Mrs. Wilson shrugged grimly. Don't know, but Martha died just 3 days after the knocking started. Found her in bed with a smile on her face, like she had finally found peace. The door to the cabin was standing wide open. I never went back to the cabin on Raven Mountain. A year later, I heard that it had burned down in a forest fire. Some say the fire started from the inside, like someone had left all the oil lamps burning. But sometimes late at night in my apartment back in the city, I hear 3 slow knocks on my door. Knock, knock, knock. When I look through the peephole, nobody is there, but I can hear a familiar voice whispering through the door. Let me in, Grace. I followed you home. I've moved 3 times since then, but the knocking always finds me. It's patient and persistent, willing to wait as long as it takes. Because once something starts knocking on your door, it never really stops. It just follows you wherever you go, waiting for the night when you're too tired or too lonely to resist. Waiting for the night when you finally answer the door and let the darkness inside. My name is Danny, and I still don't know what I followed along Devil's Backbone Ridge that cold October morning. All I know is that it looked human from behind, but when it finally turned around, I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was 14 and thought I was a pretty good hiker. I had been exploring the mountains around our town since I was 10, and I knew most of the trails by heart. Devil's Backbone Ridge was my favorite, a narrow spine of rock that ran along the top of the mountain for almost 5 miles. The ridge got its name because it was so narrow and dangerous. In some places, it was only 3 feet wide with steep drops on both sides. You had to be careful where you stepped, or you could fall hundreds of feet into the valley below. I usually hiked the ridge with friends, but that morning I was alone. It was a Saturday in late October, and the fall colors were at their peak. I wanted to take some pictures of the view from the top of the ridge. I started hiking just after sunrise, when a morning mist was still rising from the valleys. The trail was quiet and peaceful, with just the sound of my boots on a rocky path and birds singing in the trees far below. I had been hiking for about an hour when I saw the other person. He was walking along the ridge ahead of me, maybe a quarter mile away. From behind, he looked like a normal hiker, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes and a backpack. He was moving at a steady pace, not too fast or too slow. I was glad to see another person on the trail. The ridge could be dangerous to hike alone, and it would be nice to have company for the rest of the morning. I picked up my pace to try to catch up with him, but no matter how fast I walked, the distance between us stayed the same. He seemed to be moving at exactly the same speed I was, always staying just far enough ahead that I couldn't call out to him. After an hour of following him, I started to notice something strange. The man ahead of me never stopped to rest. He never paused to look at the view or check his map. He just kept walking with that same steady pace, like a machine that couldn't be turned off. Most hikers would stop every now and then to catch their breath or take pictures. The views from Devil's Backbone Ridge were some of the best in the mountains. But this man seemed completely uninterested in the scenery around him. I also noticed that he never turned his head to look around. He kept his eyes straight ahead, focused on the trail in front of him. Even when eagles soared overhead or deer crashed through the bushes in the valleys below, he didn't react at all. But the strangest thing was his footsteps. I couldn't hear them. My own boots made plenty of noise on the rocky trail, scraping, crunching, sometimes sending small stones tumbling into the valleys. But from the man ahead of me, there was complete silence. It was like he was floating just above the ground instead of walking on it. I tried calling out to him several times. Hey, wait up. But if he heard me, he didn't respond. He just kept walking with that same steady, mechanical pace. The ridge trail had several spots where it split into different paths. Some led to scenic overlooks, others connected to different mountains. But every time we came to a junction, the man took the main trail that stayed on the ridge. He never hesitated or looked at the trail markers. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. By noon, I was getting tired and hungry. I had been following this mysterious hiker for 4 hours, and my legs were starting to ache. But he showed no signs of slowing down or stopping for a break. I decided to push myself harder and try to catch up with him once and for all. I started jogging along the safer sections of the trail, being careful not to slip on the narrow parts. Slowly, the distance between us began to shrink. After 20 minutes of jogging, I was only about 50 yards behind him. I could see him more clearly now, tall and thin like I had thought, with long dark hair hanging down his back. "Hey," I called out, breathing hard from the run. "Can you wait up?" For the first time all day, the man stopped walking. He stood perfectly still on the narrow ridge, his back still turned toward me. He didn't move at all, not even to shift his weight or adjust his backpack. I slowed to a walk and approached him carefully. Something about the way he stood there felt wrong. Too still, too rigid, like a statue instead of a living person. "Are you okay?" I asked when I was about 20 feet away. Still no response. He just stood there facing away from me, silent and motionless. I walked closer, close enough now to see that his clothes were old and faded, like they had been worn for years without being washed. His backpack looked ancient too, made of some kind of animal hide instead of modern fabric. "Excuse me," I said, now only 10 feet behind him. "I've been trying to catch up with you all morning." That's when he finally turned around. What I saw made me stumble backward in terror. The thing facing me wasn't human at all. Its face was completely blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over what should have been a human head. The skin had a waxy, unnatural look, like it was made of melted candle wax. But somehow, even without eyes, I could feel it staring at me. There was an intelligence behind that blank face, something cold and hungry that was studying me like a predator studies its prey. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen with fear, unable to look away from that horrible blank face. The thing tilted its head to one side, like it was curious about me. Then it raised one hand and pointed at me with a finger that was too long and had too many joints. That broke the spell. I turned and ran back down the ridge as fast as I could, not caring about the dangerous drops on either side. I just had to get away from that faceless thing. I could hear it following me. Not footsteps, but a soft scraping sound like something being dragged across the rocks. It was moving faster than any human could run, closing the distance between us with every second. I ran harder than I had ever run in my life. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they were going to collapse, but I didn't dare slow down. The scraping sound behind me was getting closer. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze, my own voice calling out from behind me. "Hey, wait up," it said, perfectly copying the words I had spoken earlier. The thing had somehow learned my voice and was using it to mock me. But the voice sounded wrong, like it was coming from something that didn't really understand how human speech worked. "Are you okay?" my voice called again from the darkness behind me. I kept running and didn't look back. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the parking area where I'd left my car. I fumbled with my keys, started the engine, and drove away as fast as the mountain roads would allow. I never told anyone what I had seen on Devil's Backbone Ridge. Who would believe a story about a faceless thing that could copy voices? They would think I had been hallucinating or making it up. But I never hiked alone again after that day. And I never went back to Devil's Backbone Ridge, no matter how much I missed the beautiful views from the top. Because I know that thing is still up there, walking back and forth along the narrow ridge, waiting for the next lonely hiker to follow it into the mountains. Sometimes when I'm hiking other trails with friends, I see a tall figure walking ahead of us in the distance. My friends never seem to notice it, but I always make sure we take a different path. Because I learned that day that some things in the mountains only look human from behind. And once you see their true face, they never forget you. They just keep walking, waiting for you to follow them again into the high, lonely places where no one will hear you scream.